My name is Jackie Person. I'm 43 years old. I'm a mom of 6. I'm a retired police officer. And I'm a survivor of domestic abuse for 6 years. I get this a lot. You were in an abusive relationship? They don't understand how an abuser goes in and breaks down every single bit of your psyche. Everyone is vulnerable. I met my abuser in a part-time police academy. We knew each other in the class for a couple of months. Him and I started dating, and 3 months later, I was pregnant with my daughter. So when I revealed the pregnancy to him, he said he would support me, and we decided that we would go forth with the pregnancy and we would live together. My daughter was born, and it was when she was about 3 months old was the first incident of physical violence. We went to a party because he was leaving his current job for a new job. We both got intoxicated, and I had gone outside to smoke a cigarette, and he found out. He got enraged. He pushed me into the car because he was angry because I had smoked. We argued the whole ride home, driving recklessly. He was just really, really mad. And it wasn't even mad, it was rage. It was something that I had never even seen before in my life. So we got home. He was being verbally abusive, and the personality that I have, which is also an alpha personality, I was giving it right back to him. And he had heard enough, and he hit me in my face. And he hit me so hard that I went down to the ground. I was on all fours, and I was crying, and he grabbed a tuft of my hair and yanked me up into a standing position by my hair, and he pushed me into a chair. And I just grabbed the keys to my car, and I got in my car, and I went over to my parents. And all I wanted to do was to just never go back to the apartment and just be with my kids. I was just an emotional nightmare from that point forward. We ended up getting married, but I didn't want to get married, but I felt like it was too late to leave. I felt embarrassed. In 2000, he got hired as a state trooper in the state of Massachusetts. While he was in the police academy, I ended up getting hired as a full-time police officer for the town of Foxborough. And it was some really delightful news for me because it was my goal. I always wanted to be a police officer. Everything I had done in my life was to meet that goal. And I remember I was giving my 2 kids a bath. I handed him the newspaper article, and I said, "Oh, read this." And I was very excited about it. I was just very excited to share it with somebody. And I remember while I was bathing my kids, he came in and he stood in the doorway, and he just said, "Well, what the fuck are you gonna do?" And what do you mean, what am I going to do? Like, this is my goal. This is what I wanted. And I knew at that moment, I knew. And I reflect on it thinking, why did you just not leave? Just warning signs everywhere. And you just don't listen to them because you're not ready. So I said, well, I'm going to do it. And he said, well, you're going to have to figure it out. You're going to have to figure out everything with the kids. You're going to have to take care of them. And I was totally fine with that. You either do it or you don't, and you lose your chance to be a police officer. He graduated the academy. I graduated the academy. We ended up moving into a house, and that's when the real physical abuse started. I was very well pregnant with my 3rd child. We had been fighting. I wanted him to leave. And I had thrown his police uniform down the stairway. and one of the items was his police vest. And most police vests have a metal plate in the front. And he had that glaze in his eye. He grabbed his vest. He swung it at my back. While he was swinging, he pushed me down to the ground. And he had pushed me so hard that I peed in my pants. I was so scared because I was pregnant. I told him I would call the police if he didn't leave. I ended up calling a friend of ours who was a police officer, and his wife came over. It was just something that I had to deal with. And thankfully my other kids weren't home. Every single time the physical abuse happened, my kids were never home. I had never really discussed any of my abuse publicly because I was embarrassed. I felt like people wouldn't even believe me. I remember incidences of, being called a cunt, a bitch, a whore. He would say things in a way that I would question myself, my own integrity, my own gut feeling. I think part of the reason why I put up with that kind of verbal abuse is I didn't really feel that way about myself, but years and years and years of it breaks you down. And I kept just thinking to myself, if I could just change, if I could just make him happy, if I could just do this, if I could just do that, he would love me. I had one relationship outside of my marriage because I was so desperate for some affection, some appreciation, to feel something, some kind of connection with anyone. People often ask me, why did you keep having kids? Because I was in a state of mind where I just kept trying to please him. I was so manipulated and so broken down. I had lost sight of who I was. Who I was inside my home was completely different than who I was outside of my home. You put on a happy face when you're out in public. You just learn to survive. As a police officer, I would go to calls for domestic violence, reading the rights to the victims. It was like I was just reiterating it to myself, but why couldn't I do it at home? Why couldn't I just leave? I knew that it was wrong, but in my mindset, it was like, okay, well, you can just endure it, because if he's only doing it to you and he's not hurting the kids, then I can handle it. What I didn't realize is, though, exposing my children to that, it did affect my children. I feel a tremendous amount of guilt because I didn't protect my children. During my career as a police officer, I was involved in a violent attack where I had to shoot my attacker. After that incident happened, my life was turned upside down. I wasn't only trying to deal with all the emotional turmoil that was happening as a result of the shooting, it was also compounded by the abusive relationship that I was in. I ended up taking 2 months off from work. I went back to work for 6 weeks, and my head just was not in it. It wasn't good for me, it wasn't good for my family, and it certainly was not good for the people of the community. So I told my chief that I wasn't coming to work and that I needed some help. I ended up seeing a therapist because I was diagnosed with PTSD. And I talked a lot about all the baggage I had carried up until my shooting. And what I realized is that the abuse was really the issue that I needed to resolve so that I could move on from the shooting at work. The fear of leaving was much worse than leaving. I only worked minimum hours. I never worked overtime. I didn't work details. He was the breadwinner in the house. I have a son from my previous relationship while I was in the military. The day I decided to leave, my oldest son was 16. I had 3 more kids by this time. One of my twins, my youngest, came up to me in the kitchen and said, "Can I go with Daddy?" And I said, "Well, you'll have to ask Daddy." And I remember seeing my abuser pick up my 3-year-old, grab him by his arms, and he literally picked him up and threw him on the couch and said, "Your mother is a fucking cunt." Listened to my 16-year-old slam the refrigerator door behind me. And it was the very first time I heard him swear, and he said, "This is bullshit." I just simply went over and got my son, and I wasn't yelling, but I was firmly trying to say that he didn't have to watch any of the kids, that I would take care of everything. And he was screaming, "Fuck you, you're a whore, fuck you, I'm doing it." And from that moment on, he came and went in our house as he pleased. I told myself, you know what? I'm just going to see how I feel without him in this house. 2 weeks after that incident, I sat on the couch and he was putting on his boots to go to work, and I said, "I want a divorce." And he just continued to put on his boots, and he said, "Okay." And he left, and from that moment forward, we worked on getting divorced. I am perfectly grateful for the way that it happened in my life. It's really sucky that my kids had to see their mom like that. But what people have to understand is that the physical violence is the least of somebody's worries. It's the emotional scars that you carry. It's affected every single relationship that I have since I've been away from him. I have a lot of trust issues. I'm always trying to analyze people's behavior. With all that has happened, I have lost my relationship with my daughter. Because he has manipulated her into believing that he didn't abuse me. I think a woman's place for me now is to be the best mom that I can be, to lead by example, so that my kids understand what healthy parenting is and healthy relationships are. I feel like the world is sitting in the palm of my hand right now, that I can conquer anything that I want. The freedom of choice, the freedom to live my life the way that I want and not have to live in fear or what somebody else is going to think about me. I'm at a very peaceful time in my life, and anyone who's contemplating leaving an abusive relationship has to believe and has to have hope that it can be successful.